Okay, and we're back. All right, so tonight is some more DevOps. I would like to build out the deploy command and see if we can get some stacks deploying based on the branch. That'd be a nice goal for tonight. And I think I'm going to start planning out a few more streams in the future in order to talk about. I'm really interested in Vue 3. I think it's an interesting project. I like TypeScript, and the biggest problem with Vue to date, for me at least personally, is that it's not so good with the TypeScript support. At least Vue 2 wasn't. Now that Vue 3 has been built in TypeScript, supposedly it's sliced bread. I like sliced bread. It's easier. So we're gonna see how Vue 3 did. So that is a goal that's going to be upcoming. I've got a couple test projects that I've done in Vue. I tend to like it the best as far as all the frameworks. And if Vue 3 carries forward and solves the big problem that I have with Vue is the TypeScript support, I think it's a real win. Honestly, I think it's like I think it's the framework that will win. We'll see. Hmm. Good coffee. It's so important, even late at night. So, all right, let's do this. I want to make sure that I don't miss anybody tonight. I'm going to pop out my chat window and bring it over here. And let's just move this a little bit over. Okay, let's see, what does the stream look like? Can we see this if we do that? No, good. Okay, good. All right. Let's plug it. Oh, flow through this. I've done several iterations of the deploy command. When I say deploy command, this is the goal, is to be able to run npm run deploy. I'm a TypeScript junkie, as you know, and npm is just my favorite package manager, and just using it as the scripting source of truth makes it easier for me. I like the idea of having a consistent place of coming into a repo and knowing exactly how to run everything that that repo does. Like I want to know what causes that repo to tick. And having to fiddle through a bunch of different files or directories in order to figure out like how do you deploy, how do you update a stack, how do you et cetera, how do you build? Um, Go to the package JSON, look in there. It's easy to me. Um, I also think as a scripting language, JavaScript and Node is far more extensible and far more usable in the long term when it comes to being able to actually maintain the code and reuse the code. Because Bash is terrible for that. Like to me, Bash is very, very, very difficult. It's got limited ways to pass data around between different scripts in order to make it modular. And when using it for DevOps, it becomes difficult to, I think personally, to use shell. That's why I tend to lean now towards scripting all of the processes that are required in the repo, as well as the code itself in TypeScript, JavaScript, so that it's using Node as the runtime. I like also the idea of not having to task switch between shell and JavaScript as a coder, or having to understand multiple languages. Like being a polyglot is a lot to ask of new developers, and bringing on new people on the team is something that any a good developer knows is difficult. So you want to make it as easy as possible for them. Because anybody who walks behind you has to like deal with the code that you write, and ultimately, if it's in one language, it makes it easier in order to maintain that code. Is another big piece. Like not only do I think Node is a better scripting language, I do. I think it's easier to maintain because most people they know JavaScript. So that's the goal today. Is we want to be able to. We're going to need some commands from the shell environment, in particular Git, in order to figure out what branch we're on. But basically, except for that, and maybe a few other odds and ends here and there, we're going to stay entirely in the JavaScript world tonight, and we're gonna see how we go. The big picture is we want to. It's always when you start that like typing's a little off. Okay, so we want to be able to process our command line. So ultimately, this is going to be a command line application, and knowing exactly what the user is going to want to use or is wanting to do is the whole premise behind DevOps. DevOps is a way to make it easier to use software as a software developer. Like that, I didn't let that sink in. But okay, so we're going to process our command line and figure out exactly what it is we're doing. I'm still up in the air of whether I want to use Yargs or Commander for this. Yargs is something that I was reading the code for the CDK project, AWS CDK, by the way. Check it out. I do like it a lot. They're using Yargs in order to process the command line. I think it's an interesting project. I don't know much about it. I haven't used it personally. I've used Commander personally in order to do command line applications. So it's just what I'm comfortable with. But it seems like Yargs might do a good job for us. So we might be using that one. And then so after it's processed the command line, we're going to need to figure out what environment we're running in. And by that I mean, is it going to be a CI/CD environment, or is this going to be a local development box? And things are done a little bit differently between those two. In primary, it's how do you supply the environment? And that's what we're going to do. Let's copy that down. So we're going to determine CI/CD. Okay. So we're going to determine CI/CD versus dev local environment. And then the reason why is because we're going to supply the and wow, I'm so nervous in front of the camera. It's funny. It's funny. I can't. Whatever. Supply and environment. All right, and that's going to depend on whether we're getting it from an environment file or we're going to be getting it from the pipeline itself. So once we've supplied the environment to the code, we need to check to see if dependent resources are going to be already on the environment. Okay, so just going to think this through a little bit. So we're going to npm run deploy. We need to read what the intent of the command was, and then we need to react to that command depending on whether we're in a pipeline or not. So it's automated code being deploying or reading through this script. And then we're going to build our environment for the code and the pipeline, and then we're going to go deploy. Okay. Now, there's two big goals that are going to be requisite to this project. And then actually, let's put these way up here. I have some of this stuff in, I'm working in a CDK resources. This is a project that is for work. We do a lot of CDK work. This repo is something that I've kind of built in my spare time um, uh, because I really enjoy CDK. I think it's a better way to deploy code, and I want to understand how to use it. I have a lot of experience with scripting templates, and building YAML is not everybody's favorite, and it's very error prone, and it's very repetitive and a waste of time. And one of the things that I was tasked with at one of the last places that I worked was being able to script these deployments such that anybody can do it, and you can stand multiple environments next to each other. And all of it was branch based. So having that branch based focus and being able to have, because it was a web application, um, having easy URLs is something that's important. So you're not always like updating your Angular code in order to like change what API you're looking at, because you're actually hitting the actual API gateway endpoint, or you're trying to hit a Lambda function at the long URL that comes out of that deployment. And being able to have an api.example.com in order uh, to get API requests from the back end, it was an important criteria. Being able to do that, and also to have fancy branch.api.example.com was an important thing. To be able to do branch-based URLs and branch-based deployments for multiple team members working together. Now, let's just keep coding. I can ramble forever. I do love it. Okay, so we are going to have a few different stacks. We're just going to have the core stack. And these core infrastructure stacks have your DNS fundamentals, have SSL fundamentals or TLS fundamentals. It's going to do basic account setup. If you have user authentication, sometimes that can be good to put in a core stack. If you know for a fact you've got a stable user authentication setup and you've got a stable DNS setup, and you're not going to be doing a lot of modification to that stack, you don't run the risk of getting into a failed state and having to like delete it and start over, which is really, really bad for certain resources. So in the case of user authentication, where you have user pools, and in particular you have a database of users that are attached to that user pool, you don't want to just willy-nilly that. You want to make sure that that is very, very, very carefully managed. Same thing goes with your DNS. Like if you happen to have your name servers pointed at your hosted zone, and you accidentally delete your hosted zone, and then you stand it again, you get new name servers, it becomes difficult in order to deal with that. It's a pain. Now you have to change your name servers at your origin point, and sometimes there might be a 2 or 3 or 4 day, or who knows how long your time to live is on that. And I've actually had that personally, where I was like, where'd my website go? And it turns out I took my hosted zone down before I knew what I was doing, and I put it up again. And the time to live at the name server, like at the point of origin where my registrar, excuse me, all right, they were pointing to the old one that had died. You can't update that in a lot of people's browsers, or in particular in your machine. It's difficult to do that. And so now I just had to wait for that time to live to expire for my box in order to requery for the DNS entry. So like that is like, there are certain things you don't want to willy-nilly, like is the short part of that. And that's the idea of the core stack. Like the core stack should be your hosted zone. It's going to be your API gateway account. Depending on how we're going to do the DNS, it probably will house our SSL certificate. Okay. we're going to use star certificates. If you have a client app and a back-end app, and we want to do environments, and we want to be able to do branch management. Okay, so we have example.com as our root domain, and then we want the admin app is going to be at admin.example.com. All right, and now we want to be able to look at environments like branch-wise. So now if we're on dev dot or dev.admin.example.com, or you'd probably more likely you'd want admin.dev.example.com. Generally, you want the environment is like the end of the domain string, like the uh, that's neither here nor there. The short of it though is the important part is that you can only go two subdomains out on a starred certificate. So in the case of the core stack, we probably only want to have our SSL or TLS certificate tied with the environment, meaning we are going to get an SSL certificate for dev.example.com. And then all of the applications that live at dev.example.com, as long as they're two subdomains away, will be covered by that same SSL certificate. So we do admin.dev.example.com would be the client, and then you do api.admin.dev.example.com would be the API. That does make sense, yes. Okay, and then you'd swap out dev for prod. Well, actually, you just drop that for prod. Yeah, that's why always to the end. Yeah, that's the rule. That's why there's reasons why I have these rules. Like there's reasons why I've gone down a path and we said we were going to do it this way, this way. We talked about it all back and forth and back and forth, and this is why we went this way. This is one of those things. Okay, is you always want to have, in order to avoid subdomain crashes, meaning the branch name is the same as the application name. So you have admin.example.com is where you'd host your admin UI interface. And then if you do dev.admin.example.com, now no matter what branch you're working on the admin app, you're not going to have a crash of URLs. If you now say, we're going to stand our authentication microservice. So that's a backend thing. And we want to put that at auth.example.com. And then we're gonna version that at dev.auth.example.com. You can have multiple apps at the same so like you would have app would be the closest subdomain, then your environment. Now, if you have sub apps, meaning like say your admin has an API and has a client, you wouldn't put client.admin.example.com, and you wouldn't do API. You would probably do API.admin.example.com, but now you could potentially, if you had an admin branch of your client application, that would also want to live at admin dot, or excuse me, would API. Wait, sorry, I'm getting myself confused now. Yeah, no, because if you're going to version the admin app, that would be admin.api.admin.example.com. But that would be 3 segments. Okay. So as long as you don't have a branch named API on the client application, you wouldn't have any kind of clashes, and that's when you could restrict easily. So I'm going to write this down now that I've thought it through. And I've got video proof now. I love that I do that on camera. I love that you can do this on camera and like remind. It's like, oh yes, that's why we did it. Okay. All right. That's good coffee. Okay. So in the case of dev.admin.example.com, you could have API.admin.example.com using like real paper and pen. I know, silly. Let's do this. Let's do it up here. Actually, we'll record it here for posterity. API dev dot API dot admin dot example dot com, and then we would have dev dot admin dot example dot com, and we'd have dev dot lambdas dot example dot com, and that does still continue to hold. And if you want prod, you just take that away. So that is the root of wherever it lives. And then while it's under development, it would be at dev.api.admin.client name .dev hosting spot.com. So this would be like the internal, like the company you work for's internal hosting server, like hosting domain for the company. And then this is the client you're working on today. Like that's their project. And then this part is specific to your business. So this is specific to your company. Like we have this app, we have that app, we've got this many different microservices within this one particular application. So they all want to live at a common domain so that they can all be found together and represented by a common SSL certificate. Sometimes that matters. I don't know why always, but sometimes. And then you have the environment at the end. That to me, this is how domain routing should be done. Okay, so we have so we're going to do environment. And that is, and then we're going to do the app domain. And then we're going to do the root domain. And sometimes for prod, all you need is that, right? Okay. That seems like a good goal. At least that's a good goal to shoot for. And then, So because of this, like in this situation, we've got 3 subdomains off of the application domain. So this would not be covered by a star certificate. So we would need to issue that star certificate on the admin stack, not on the root stack or the core stack. However, the hosted zone, because the hosted zone is going to be covering this portion of the domain, still needs to be on the core stack. Whether you're working on your local and dev environment, or you're working in the cloud, or you're working for a client, or it's standing on their environment, that piece will, yeah, okay. I think we're here. I think this seems like where we want to be. Okay. Now, that hosted zone, this API gateway account, which is a logging functionality thing, the SSL TLS certificate through ACM. If it happens to be needed, maybe we do actually have one. That's not a bad idea. What we should do, okay, this is what we're going to do, is we're going to have the core stack will automatically deploy a certificate that covers the root domain, because that's probably going to be what's going to cover us. And then if another stack needs to deploy because it's got too many subdomains, it will deploy its own certificate and take care of itself, and they will clean up after themselves. Okay, seems nice. And then, oh, what other things have to be on this? Depending if you're doing encryption, you might want to have a KMS key here. We're not going to need that for now. Like we'll deal with that as a nice feature addition. Hmm. Okay. Does that look better? That looks better. We're like professionals. Okay. Um, okay. And then everything else will reference that thing is what I've done. That's how we did it in Nomad DevOps. Is it would know what it was deploying was the goal. There would be a configuration file in order to figure out is it working on. Actually, what did I do? It wasn't even that it was working on this or that. It figured that out. So I went through the node modules in the package JSON and I looked for certain things in there. I looked for Angular. I looked for Vue. I looked for React. Um, Sometimes you find multiple things. Like I would look for Express. I would look for, is it, because it's like if it's an API, you'd see Express. I looked for AWS Lambda. I looked for different packages that would give me a clue as to what commands need to be run in order to build and deploy that code, because it's not exactly the same depending on what you're building. Now, when it comes to building all the front end frameworks, they all do it about the same. They use roughly the same command. So that's pretty easy. Um, and deploying them is the same. Like the stack is the same. You need the same components in order to host an Angular site as you do a Vue site, as you do a React site. Where it starts to get sticky is what happens if you find GraphQL in there? Like how do you deploy a GraphQL endpoint? There's a lot of ways to do that. Like there's a lot of answers to that question. So being able to figure that out was something I just hadn't gotten to yet. And I don't think we need to get that far. Like, I think I was trying to make it too broad and too diverse, which is the difficulty, is like everything should be specialized and focused. I've read this in a she does Instagram posts called the blog of today. And I met her as a digital nomad out in the world in Koh Tao. And I have to admit, like, a lot of those people are full of yes. Like they all want to be influencers and make jobs telling people how to be influencers, and it's like there's a whole business built around. It's like being famous for the sake of being famous. Yeah, it's stupid. But I have to admit, some of the stuff that they say makes sense to me. And one of the posts that I saw today was uh, being a specialist is important because if people don't know how to describe you or how to explain you, they don't. So knowing how to describe yourself and explain yourself by being a specialist was like the whole gist of it. So that like you end up earning business really is the big piece. As a nomad, you got to like build your business, build your brand. The brand is you. And how do you sell like yourself as the jack of all trades? It's funny. I used to tell myself that like I do kind of still like the idea of being a Renaissance man. I think nobody's a Renaissance man anymore. I've been saying it for a while, and it's true. Like she literally teaches people and supposedly gets paid. I don't know. Like so, a lot of times people say they like that's their job, but like they want it to be their job. They just don't get paid for it, so they do it for free. Doesn't count. But at the same time, like she gets paid for beating this crap into people's head. It's like be a specialist. That's what keeps your marketing focused. That's what keeps you targeted, that you're solving a specific problem for that target audience. And then once you fix their heartache, you can upsell them on some other something that you do. And I like being a jack of all trades, but it's hard to program code that does that. It's hard to program an algorithm that can do everything, that can deploy all code with one command. Yes, I guess it's possible, but if you've read code bases like serverless or CDK, like there's thousands of, it's like there's huge amounts of code. So if you want your open source package to work, keep it focused, keep it narrow. Like that's kind of what I'm kind of going with this on this trend recently is that I want this deploy command to do just this, which is hard, even still. Like it's not easy to do what we're about to do. Is that I want it to be able to stand applications that are well defined, meaning it doesn't have to figure out what kind of application it's standing. It's just standing stacks because it's a CloudFormation application. It's a CLI CloudFormation helper application that's going to use CDK under the hood. Sounds easy enough, but it's not really because like there's a lot of stacks that can be stood and et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to get there. Um, but I think that will be the key to Nomad DevOps is like being successful. We'll see. It's an open source package. Is like being able to do this, like being able to do the just like I think the I think the value in this as a developer to me in my ease of being able to do this stuff. I think you too think. I hope. Let's chat with the world. Is anybody even watching? Yeah, there's one person watching. That's cool. Hi. Um, okay. I think there's value in knowing where I'm gonna go in order to see my code. So that's the problem that this solves is once I've deployed code, how do I see it in order to make sure it works? And how do I make sure I don't ruin that other developer's code in the process of trying to see my own code? Okay. And then once we have our core stack out, there's going to be the application stacks. There's going to be artifacts buckets. That is so important. Like, if you have worked in software and you've gone to deploy a stack and it says the bucket that you're trying to deploy to does not exist, or you try to delete the stack and it says the bucket you're trying to delete is not empty, okay? You understand the frustration of those two. This should do that as well. Like, that is a must. It, this script, this deploy script, should make what it needs and make it easy for you, but it should also clean up after itself so that, like, without accidentally deleting the things that matter from before. We talked about that. So it should clean up after itself so it's just not messy, because messy, cleanliness and godliness or something. It's true. Code is the same way, and so is your AWS account. Like, not only will you thank yourself for not having to search through everything all the time, like, I know there's a search box at the top of every service, but having to physically look for stuff sucks. So, clean buckets. Like, not paying for extra data. It's cheap, but that's not the point. Don't be messy. Okay. Um, there's a few other things, but we'll get there. Okay, pipelines. Okay, I'm of two minds of pipelines. I like the idea that pipelines get stood by the application that is being represented by a pipeline. Um, I think the pipeline should be deployed by the application stack. Like, the application that's being deployed by the pipeline should be responsible for that pipeline, or vice versa. Or we'll figure out exactly how that dependency works. I've seen patterns where the pipeline is always there and it does everything, and all the apps are deployed by the same pipeline. So you're deploying everything all the time. And the idea is that, like, all code should be stateless. It shouldn't be a problem. You should be able to deploy reproducibly and repeatedly. It doesn't matter. It's really, like, it shouldn't matter. The wait time, though, of building all code and deploying all code all the time is not ideal. Very high dollars. Like, generally, developers are very expensive. Like, it's not, if you've ever tried to develop yourself, or you work in software, or you've tried to hire someone in software, you understand that there's, like, a lot of money attached with what we do. It's very difficult. It's not everybody can do it, and supply and demand dictates that it's very expensive. And waiting for things to deploy, waiting for CloudFormation to finish deploying something, waiting for a pipeline to finish deploying something is not okay. Like, that is something that, like, this is not okay at whatever, $2, $3, $4, $500 an hour. I think that so this should be by with the application it handles. Okay. That just needs to be able to deploy into other accounts from other accounts. So setting that up, how that, we need to handle the flow of deploy to the different environments. Is the right word? Uh, it's not the right word, but we'll come back to what the actually wording of that should be. I have no idea what they're watching. It's loud. Okay. Oh, okay. What other requirements does this thing want to do? All right, so we need to be able to pass that in from. Okay, this is why I got onto this topic of trying to lay this out. It's like, what kind of things do we need at what stages of the deploy and where will they be coming from was the most confusing part of doing this the last couple times I've done this. Is that how do all of these variables get propagated and where do they come from? Is it coming from an environment file, like an env file? Is it coming from a config file? And because those things can change, like is it coming from process.env or is it like just a bash environment variable? And then is that coming from the pipeline? Is it defined by the environment in the pipeline? Is it being defined by the command line? Is it like there's a lot of moving parts here? Okay, this is it branches the way I've done this before to make it easiest, not only to grok but maintain, is that you want the deploy command, you want the deploy of the stacks to be consistent. Doesn't matter where it comes from. Like you want it to do the same thing. Like your ultimate deploy function will take the same parameters as inputs so that the deploy function does the same thing everywhere. Like it should deploy the code the same way, whether it's deploying from a Jenkins machine. It should deploy whether it's in a code build machine. It's you're building it in a Docker container. Uh, are you building it on your local dev box? Like, is it actually running on your local command line? Like that should all be a variable that you pass into that deploy function, and the deploy runs that deploy process. And that way you can guarantee reproducible builds and deploys independent of where that's happening. Now, this is the challenging part, though, is depending on where it's getting built, those things are represented slightly differently. So the way I've done this in the past is you come into this deploy command is like your single point of entry, independent of what environment it's being deployed from and to. And then you have this flow that diverges into a few different ways in order to collect the environment variables that are going to be set for the rest of the script and the rest of the deploy process. And actually, which will also propagate to the stacks that get deployed by the pipeline and the deploy process, which because we're like those are two different things. So like we're actually, and this was also a huge confusion I might add, is that the idea that the environment that's required during the deploy process and the environment that's required during the runtime process are not necessarily the same thing. So making sure that that part is also well understood in this branched process, because like if you're deploying just the stack, like npm run deploy and deploying the stack, and like whatever your environment that's represented in the .env file is how we were doing it is read, and that becomes your process.env. Now if it deploys that same stack from like to the real world, like it goes out to the cloud. Now those live inside some environment variables that are in Lambda, and that was probably set by a code build container. So setting the environment variables on the code build container that will persist for each build of the actual code. And then so the process.end that gets into the Lambda came from code build, which was set at the time that code build was deployed, not the time that you pushed the code and it was built. And that was a very difficult thing for most people to understand. So being able to set these like being able to diverge to figure out what environment you're in first, so you know where the environment variables need to go, and then you mash that all into like an internal environment configuration that gets passed into that deploy command. And now you have a way to cover all circumstances that you're going to be running this function in, but you can also maintain that consistency to know that it's going to run the same every time, no matter where it is. And that's the part that really is important, is that you don't necessarily want to have a deploy command that runs in one environment and then a slightly different build command, like a slightly different build, like essentially a script file, like a build it this way for this environment, and then you have another environment or another script file that you build it this way for that environment, and then those two script files tend to diverge over time through the development cycles. And now you have two sources of truth of what this thing is supposed to look like once it's standing. And you also have these two sources of truth of like how it's supposed to be deployed and where do the environment variables come from, and like, is this the dev branch or the prod branch or the QA branch, and like how many deploy, you know what I mean? Like there was a lot of confusion in that process. So we want to process the command line. I'm just bringing myself back here. We're going to figure out whether we're running in CI/CD or if we're running on a local dev box. Then we're gonna build some kind of environment agnostic um, configuration that's going to represent all of the state that's necessary to do what's needed. And then we're going to a nicety is that, say for instance, I've got matthewkeel.com. Like that's one of the websites that I've got. And I've got it on AWS already. And now I want to use this deploy command in order to deploy api.matthewkeel.com. Or I'm going to do a DevOps package and I'm going to add it to my collection. And so now I want to host it at devops.matthewkeel.com. Right? But I've manually set up my hosted zone already. So now I've got a hosted zone out in my environment. I don't want to necessarily stand another hosted zone because that will, if we change namespaces, will break the first one. Like I want to use them together. Like I want to basically use that existing one. So instead of just standing another matthewkeel.com, we want to look on AWS, see if that name is represented on any of the hosted zones that are out there. If it is represented, we want to import that into our stack and then maintain it with the stack so that now it will be represented underneath our CIC or with our infrastructure as code. And actually, let me take that back. I went one step too far. We do not want to take over control of a resource that was created prior to our coming in. Like, who knows why that hosted zone was put there? In this case, it's matthewkeel.com. I know why it was there, but like the idea of who comes behind us and like we don't want to screw them over in them not realizing that like, oh, the hosted zone for the entire company is on this one stack, and it like got usurped and like brought into like the process, and they accidentally delete it, and now we've got an issue because like, yeah, okay, so we want to just be able to use that hosted zone ID in our stack so we can add route record sets to it. Okay. if a bucket exists already, we want to figure that part out. Okay, so check for dependent resources that may exist in the AWS account. So existing main resources. We're going to look for existing artifact buckets, existing domain resources. Um, One can make the argument about looking for tags and things and just trying to find whatever else is out there, but that is, I think, a feature we'll add in, and we'll just look for the specifics that we need to know right this moment. And in particular is we don't want to create buckets that are going to be clashing with buckets that already exist, and we don't want to recreate a hosted zone if one already exists in their account. And same thing for the API gateway account. You can only have one per account, so that's one where we just like, if it already exists, great, we can log. We don't need to worry about making it again. Okay? Oh, we've been here before. We've already built the core stack. We don't need to make another one. Easy win. Okay. Processing the command line. We're going to also want to know what branch we are on. That will come after processing the command line. It's like we do not want to run the git command. This is a big issue I've run into before, is that git does not exist in all environments, like in all virtual machines, as far as like build machines, in particular code build, or Lambda, actually, also. It is in code build, I believe, most of the images. This is where I don't want to speak incorrectly. But for sure, in Lambda, there is no git. So accidentally running the git command in Lambda causes an error, and it's trust me on that one. So being able to determine whether we're in the CI/CD environment, at which point we are going to take whatever branch comes from the CI/CD environment. Like once we know we are already in CI/CD, we will just say, we're going to do that, like process.m.branch. If in CI. Okay. And that's a neat little trick. We'll use that where you run git status and you just run a regex across that to figure out what branch you're on. Very easy way in order to add that part right there. Like whatever branch is on your git is the one that gets stuck there. You don't have to think about what environment you're deploying to. You just hit deploy. and it goes. Awesome. Okay. What other requirements do we have before we start coding this thing up? This is technically, I mean, people do a lot of the BDD and TDD development where you put all this it should that and describe this and like I mean you can do that. I'm sure you hear the little bit of like twinge in my voice. It's possible. Like it's probably there's probably a project manager out there that's cringing right now if you see this that is like, yeah, you should be doing that, but this is fine. Like just doing a little bit of it's like an outline, like an outline before we code. Um, okay, all right. I tell you what, I'm gonna go have a coffee. I will be back. Also gonna take 5 minutes to just make sure I like think about this, and then we're gonna start knocking some code out. All right, I'll see you soon. Okay, hello. Hello. All right, do we want to? I think process RP is going to be something that is just going to do what it needs to do, and it's going to pass back some kind of phone. Just say it's going to pass back some kind of object that's going to have some kind of interesting things in it. And probably going to want that. Um, this is probably going to return a string or an object, or I don't know what it's going to return yet. So we're just going to leave what we don't know and just move on. Um, so we will process our command line. This is too many lines. Okay, and then code build has some. We're going to focus on code build. It's the one that we're most likely will get built in for the moment. Has actually we could just like set a variable that we would set to any pipeline or anywhere. That would basically we would default that as the developer, the DevOps developer, that like we know we're going to set. Uh, uh, hmm. That will probably cover us if it's a bool or the string true, because we put true in and it actually came back as the string true, not the Boolean true, which I find happens a lot, depending. So we will just look for the string true, and then we will do, we will Boolean coerce. I don't like that because that could be any string now. That could be a false. That could be that, or it equals true. Yeah, just fine. Tell us that's important. We're just gonna look for the string true, and we don't want to bool because like if you have any string there, and we put the Boolean coercion in any string, you could have the string false, which would be an accident, and it would still come back as true. We're just gonna take that away for now. Um, because what I'm thinking now is what we could do is just get rid of that and just But this would auto, like the engine would automatically Boolean course that anyway. It would attempt to. So if this value was false, okay, we're just going to delete that and we're going to leave it as true. Like if it's the hard string true of within CI/CD, which we're going to feed to any pipeline that we build, it will go down this path. And we're going to use a lowercase there so we don't conflate that with that. Or do we want to generally like all caps to actually be a const that is like environment based, or like I don't really like all caps that much. This is a possible candidate. Even though it's not a const, it's still a let. It's because we're going to set it on one of two branches. Do we want to do an all caps branch? Or we're just going to stick with the lowercase branch. I think that's probably the right way to do it here. And then we are going to do that. Oops. And that will guarantee that we've got a string there. Like even if this branch is undefined, we're going to get the string undefined, which is still better than having no value there because we will need that branch in a second. Okay, and then equals. And we're going to write that function in a second. We're going to get the get branch, like I was saying before, up here, and we're going to right there. We're gonna figure that out. Okay. Here is where I did that. Excuse, getting late. I've done this a few times. This is the thing is I've done it a few times, and I've been looking through the code in order to like reinvent the wheel, and I tried to do too much with it in the latest rebuild that I did in Nomad DevOps, and it got a little bit difficult to trace things through. So just rethinking through this and doing it out loud is making more comfortable on camera, and it's I think good record. Yeah, something. Okay, so excuse me. You know that's going to give a string. Okay. And actually, what I really think we want is this. Yeah, that looks better. Okay. Okay. Let's get rid of that. Okay, we're going to bring back a bunch of stuff from that process.args. And I would guess we're going to want to do this check here actually inside that process.args, and we're going to get branch back within there. My like that. Okay. Because I have a feeling we're going to want a command line argument that's going to allow us to change what branch we're going to deploy. Like if we're on my, case in point, I'm on my local machine, I want to deploy prod. Like I just made a change, it's a breaking change, someone put a ticket in and it's like, oh my God, hair on fire, fix it. Like I want to be able to download that code to my local box. I want to be able to fix it real quick and do whatever like little things. It's probably something small if it's that big of a deal, where it went through all of your unit tests and all of your automation, et cetera, and it's like still got to prod. Like chances are it's either like you're going to revert a commit, and you're just going to push the last working version out. Like that can be done through pipeline, but like sometimes it's easier to just like npm run deploy from your local box. So like I want to npm run deploy prod. So that's a situation where you'd want to take that branch from your command line, not from figuring it out from process.env.branch or from your git branch. You definitely don't want to deploy whatever feature branch you're on. Well, actually, yeah. Okay. Like for instance, we have our prod is dev, and then prod is actually in another environment. So in our case, I want to deploy to prod, but actually I'm npm run deploy dev. So that's confusing, but it like you wouldn't want like you would be on the dev branch on your box, but you do not want to have the dev URL. You want the prod URL. It just so happens prod is not on the master branch or mainline or whatever your company uses. It's on dev. Okay, so you don't want to do npm run deploy from dev and then have it stand dev.admin.example.com. You want it to stand admin.example.com. So it needs to know that dev is prod. The code state would be represented by whatever's in your VS Code. So like whatever is here is whatever your code is. Doesn't matter what branch you're actually using. Because if you want to deploy to prod and you want to use the librarify branch, you should be able to do that. One should be able to npm run deploy prod, and it will deploy whatever code you have to wherever you're going to. Like the idea of the master branch was 2 commits were added to master, it was pushed, and that code got built and sent out by the pipeline, and all of a sudden the site took a poop. So you want to go back 2 commits in head, but like 2 commits from head, but you don't want to change where the pipeline is. You want to do forensics. So like you just want to push new code, but you don't want to change your reference. You want to npm run deploy prod, but you git reset head 2 in order to go back to 2 commits, and then you want to hit npm run deploy, but you're now not on master. Like, technically, like you're at a, if you've checked out, like if you did a reset 2 commits back, you would still be on master. But if you were to check out a specific commit, like you did a git check out of that SHA, now you'd be in detached head. You wouldn't have a branch association. So if you do git status, it wouldn't come up with anything. Like at that point, you need to do npm run deploy prod. Like you need to add a branch qualifier to deploy that stack properly. Yes. Okay. So if the command line has the branch, if the command line has a branch env notation, that should take is that spelled right? We'll do that later. So if the command line has the branch or the environment, that should take precedence. Okay, it should go in that order. If I, as the developer, run npm run deploy, and I want to run npm run deploy dash dash branch name, or we figure that out. I'm not sure what that looks like yet, but that's the idea, the ergonomic we're looking for. That should be the first. That's the branch that gets deployed. Deploy to that branch, meaning we're not going to git check out that branch, but we are going to add the environment to the beginning here, like we are on that branch, so that like all the feature stuff, like all of the essentially it really is the DNS routing and a couple other naming things that will get changed by that. Like putting the code in the right bucket, like putting it in the production bucket, not in the development bucket or in a branch bucket. Like if it wants to be in the production bucket, it needs to go to that bucket, regardless of whether we're in detached head. Like if you hit npm run deploy prod, it goes to the right place. Like the code goes to the right place, the DNS routing, okay, that should be the first thing that happens, yes. And then it will check, are we in CI/CD? If we are in CI/CD, take from whatever environment is set in the CI/CD. Check. Then it will run git status. Check. That seems like that flows properly. Okay. Okay. Oh, it's getting late. We've been on for an hour and a half. I think that might be enough for tonight. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining. It soothes me to be here. As nerve-wracking it is getting in front of the camera, and it is a little nerve-wracking. It's funny. It feels very comfortable. So thank you for joining. See if we can make it better next time.